With new polls showing Kamala Harris surging, and with the online birther-style attack on her, I'm joined now by Ian Sams, the National Press Secretary for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Ian, thank you for taking a few minutes. Let me ask you this, just looking at those electability numbers we just put up there was one theory of Kamala Harris and that attack on Joe Biden on the debate stage the other night, that in part, she was trying to show Democratic voters that she is capable of leading an attack on Donald Trump. Let me show you how it's done against Joe Biden. This is how it would work against Donald Trump. Was that part of the thinking there?
Look, I think what she did on that debate stage was show that she was the leader on the stage. And it wasn't just the exchange with Vice President Biden. Don't forget, there was a moment where candidates bursted out into a bickering contest, and she rose above the fray and said, look, folks, our voters don't want a food fight. They want us to talk about how to put food on the table. And so what she did on that stage was command and to show the American people what's motivating her, tell her personal story, and connect her story and the stories of voters with the agenda that she's going to push. So I think that the poll that you guys have been talking about today that shows this rise in electability is cutting against this really pernicious narrative that largely, unfortunately, affects women in this race, that somehow you have to look a certain way or sound a certain way or be competitive in a certain place to be electable. But what Thursday night showed is anybody can be electable. All you got to do is go out there and earn it.
Well, again, with that poll question we put up as well, I think it was the YouGov poll showed that just as Harris's electability score is rising, Biden's, potentially as a consequence of that exchange, has dropped significantly in that poll, a 13-point drop in the number of Democrats saying he's capable of beating Donald Trump. Do you think Joe Biden's capable of beating Trump?
Well, look, I think that the polling so far has shown that Democrats are well positioned going into this election. I think what people like you and I who follow the ins and outs of this every day need to always remember, and there was a really helpful AP poll last week that showed that 22% of people know a lot about the candidates' positions. 2/3 of people aren't paying much attention to this race. And, you know, I think that plays big in how the numbers are moving right now. This is a debate that 18 million people tuned in to watch. Keep in mind, only 30 million people voted in the entire 2016 Democratic primary. And so this is a moment where candidates are introducing themselves. Obviously, people like Vice President Biden and Senator Sanders, who've run for president before and have high name ID across the country, you know, folks tend to have an opinion of them. But what we're seeing right now is people like Kamala Harris introducing herself to voters for the first time. And on that stage, that's exactly what she did.
The issue behind that exchange she had with the former vice president on stage, it was busing, and it brought back the politics of the 1970s, the 1980s in a lot of ways. And one of the questions that emerged from that is Kamala Harris calling for a return to the busing that we saw in the 70s and 80s? And she told my colleague Vaughn Hilliard yesterday she does support busing. It seemed unclear in what is the plan? What specifically is Kamala Harris calling for now when it comes to busing?
Yeah, she supports busing, and you know, she wouldn't have been in the Senate in the 1970s, I don't think, but she would have supported it then. And I think that what we're talking about right now is the fact that school districts across this country remain very segregated, and we need to do more to stop that and to integrate our schools. And if communities use busing as a tactic to do that, that's great. There's great legislation right now in Congress from Marcia Fudge in the House and Senator Chris Murphy in the Senate that she supports that would allow federal investment and grant money to go towards school diversification efforts. And so we're not talking about, you know, some sort of broad cudgel that we're talking about here. What we're talking about is making sure that right now in this environment of the modern era, that schools have the resources they need to diversify and ensure that kids have the best opportunity to get a good education.
So to be clear, then, are you drawing a distinction between districts that voluntarily say they want to make busing part of their approach and supporting that with federal money, or are you talking about using the power of the federal government to try to compel districts that otherwise don't want to do busing?
Well, look, the idea on the table right now is what's in Marcia Fudge and Chris Murphy's bill, which talks about federal investment for localities to diversify their schools. And I think it's important to remember what Jesse Jackson, I believe it was, said earlier today, that there was no such thing in the 1960s, really, of voluntary busing. What we were dealing with at the time in the 60s and 70s was
Kamala Harris, the story she told was an example of voluntary busing. Berkeley, California was, I think, the first city over 100,000. And it was, it was an outlier, absolutely. But the story she told was a story of, I guess I'm asking, is that the model she has in mind for the country? her own
Well, I think that
experience in Berkeley.
You can't take a snapshot in time and apply it to the modern era. Everything changes over the course of time, and right now there are new approaches that we have to take. Busing can be a part of that solution. But I think what's important to remember here, I think I saw a statistic as this debate raged on that only 2% of schools at the time were voluntarily bused. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, Vice President Biden, then Senator Biden, took a broad brush at this and said that busing was an asinine concept. So it wasn't the nuance of voluntary versus forced that we were talking about here. And what Kamala was doing there, I just want to make this point really clear. It's not about her. She was speaking for thousands, if not millions, of students, black and brown students across this country who were being bused to integrate public schools at a time of great upheaval and at a time of trying to end this school segregation crisis. So I think that in the days after, she got texts from people who said, I was bused to school as well. And that meant so much to me for you to tell that story and to remind people of the history of this country. So I just think it's important that this can't just be boiled down to one person in one school bus, because it applied to so many people across this country.
I want to ask you about this as well. Again, in the wake of that debate, there was some attention to some online comments that were made. We could put this one up here. I think this was Katrina Pearson on Kamala Harris, Trump campaign advisor, saying Kamala Harris is going to get a stern talking to after the debate. Can't play the race card without going all the way. Obama did choose Biden, and no one yelled foul. Obama is actually African American. Kamala Harris is not. Who is best to speak for the African-American community? You also had Donald Trump Jr. retweeting something to a similar effect. He did end up deleting that tweet, but that is the president's son, at least initially, putting that out there. Is this what you're seeing online right now? Are you seeing any effect on your campaign from this right now?
Frankly, I think that you're seeing all the Democratic candidates. You're seeing Republicans even, former RNC strategist Eric Erickson also joining in saying that this is vile and disgusting. This is the same kind of racist crap that Don Jr.'s dad tried to use on Barack Obama, and it didn't work then, and it's not going to work now. And so I think it's just important that in this moment, everyone of good conscience, of goodwill, stand up and say that this stuff has to stop. And frankly, the spread of misinformation has not been slowed since 2016. And part of this is the problem of failure of action on behalf of leaders in the Senate like Mitch McConnell, who are preventing efforts to shore up our election security, for example, right now. And so I think that with this issue of playing these racist attacks, the right wing's going to throw that stuff at Kamala because, frankly, they don't got much else. And I think that it's just going to take everybody standing up and saying this stuff is wrong, questioning people's identities, not talking about the issues, not talking about substance, but really going after people for who they are. That's just not going to fly in 2019 and 2020.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.